So thanks everyone for joining. My name is Chad Bowling. I'm the broadband manager here at the Wyoming Business Council. And joining us today as part of our staff, we have Julie Park and Mitch Herget with CTC, who will be assisting with the presentation. Without further ado, Julie, I will hand it over to you and we will go ahead and get started. And also, if there are any questions, please add them to the Q&A section and we will go through them throughout the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Chad. So I'll do a quick overview of the program changes based on NTIA's policy notice that was released June 6th. I apologize. And we'll have, natural pauses in our section, so then we can take a look at the Q&A questions that you're submitting. So please feel free to type those in as we go through. I'm not going to go into too much detail. We'll dedicate more time to walking through the programmatic changes and how it'll impact your applications and projects that a lot of folks have already been working on. But a brief summary of the main changes of the policy notice is there was an elimination of non-statutory requirements. So this related to the labor and employment workforce development requirements, climate resiliency, open access, local coordination, middle class affordability, non-traditional broadband providers, and the low cost service option. So you'll see those changes in the application. The requirements have become null as NTIA has removed those non-statutory requirements. There was also a requirement by NTIA for the optimization of BEAD locations. And so WBO has been working to update the BEAD eligible BSLs. We had ISPs involved in the unlicensed fixed wireless data collection efforts, and that was part of making sure that the list of BSLs reflected the most accurate number of locations that are in need of BEAD funding. And then the shift to tech neutrality. So there's, and Mitch will go into detail on this later, but a difference in evaluation of projects from priority and non-priority. So the way that we are defining those two terms is a little different from BEAD 1.0. And again, this is just a general summary of the policy notice as it was released last month, but there is a 90-day window that eligible entities are working to submit the final proposal in. And so it's a very compressed window. Because of that, you're going to see there are some creative approaches to making sure that applicants can submit proposals and make sure that Wyoming has as many viable applications to cover the locations. And we'll walk through what those changes are and how that adjusts the submission requirements for certain questions or what new materials may be required. But overall, the NTIA policy notice required the update of the BEAD eligible BSL list, and states had to have the IP correction letter approved by NTIA before they could open their benefit of the bargain round. And then they are still requiring the 7-day public comment period before submitting on September 4th. And so, again, I'll just do a quick overview of the non-statutory requirements that are no longer required in the application. And you'll see this in the application guide that has been re-uploaded as version 2.0 to the website. But any of the questions that were related to labor, employment, and workforce, climate change requirements, or open access, those have been eliminated and shifted. So if applicants had already answered those questions, you don't need to, remove the submitted responses or files. They're just not going to be considered in the evaluation. And because of the way that the portal is configured, there still needs to be a submission technically. So if you've already written out the narrative or submitted a PDF file, those can stay there. The state will just no longer be evaluating those when they review the application materials. And then my next slide again, the other non-statutory requirements that were eliminated by NTIA as a requirement as they relate to local coordination and stakeholder engagement, the non-traditional broadband providers, middle-class affordability, and the low-cost service option.
And just a point of clarification on the low cost service option, it is changed. It as the NTI pointed out, it's not it's still required. It's just defined by the applicant, not the state. So you'll notice that in your document. Just want to clarify that part as well.
Yep. One of the new documents that applicants will need to submit has the questions related to low cost service option. NTIA released some new guidance yesterday in their FAQs about the low cost service option. So you'll see that in the new materials. It's not a complete elimination of any of those questions. It's just I guess, a shift in how they are being asked. Thanks for the clarification, Mitch.
No problem.
So that's kind of the overview of the big changes, and now we're going to get into how they affect the applications and your overall procedure in submitting and resubmitting applications. I'll go into pre-qualification first. Wyoming did host a pre-qualification application round, and so there are some changes to the requirements from the policy notice. However, if applicants are already pre-qualified, you don't need to do anything. You can, proceed with updating your bargain round applications. So this is more of a shift for any folks who would like to submit a pre-qualification application. The new or revised application guide has the details on which questions are no longer valid. But for folks who are already pre-qualified, if any questions have now become null or obsolete, then you don't need to go in and delete anything. Those questions or the responses to those questions just won't be considered in evaluation. The process and the materials are still very similar, and they're all still available on the WBO website. So the portal is now open for pre-qualification. Once this webinar is over, you can go in and start applying for pre-qualification if you are a new provider. And the guide also has instructions on how to do that for folks who don't have an existing Salesforce account with WBC. There are instructions on how to get that started, but it's a very quick process, and then you can get into the portal and start filling out the application. This slide, again, only relevant for completely new applicants or folks who want to go back and adjust their answers, but again, not required because you are already pre-qualified. But feel free to reference this slide in the deck, and we'll publish this after the webinar on which questions have been eliminated as requirements. And there is a little bit of guidance on how to respond with a null response. And specifically for question 2.1, there is a difference in requirement for the LEO satellite providers. Instead of having to submit the financial requirements, there is an intent to provide those financial certification materials from NTIA in lieu of the audited financial statements. That's the only difference. But again, if you're already pre-qualified, then this doesn't apply, and you can move forward with the bargain round. And this slide is just a screenshot from something you'll see updated in the application guide, but it's just best practices on how to provide a null response. The way that the application portal was originally configured, it requires responses for certain questions, but now that we have had questions eliminated, we still technically need a null response, and so it's just kind of how to provide the NA response for the different types of questions. So I know I walked through the program changes and pre-qualification adjustments, and I'm struggling to see where the Q&A questions are. Mitch, are there any questions at this point, or does anyone have questions on adjustments to the program at large or the pre-qualification application?
No new questions at the moment, Julie, so we're in pretty good shape. I'll just kind of reiterate a couple of the points that you said before we move on, which is that 90-day window that started on June 6th. It's moving pretty quickly here. Some of the things that we're doing in this program are to make sure that we can comply with getting everything done in that window. And so one of the things, and Julie will touch on this more as we get into the nuts and bolts of how you submit your applications in the bargain round, but it applies here as well, is there was no time for WBO or really many states to be able to reprogram their portals. So what we've done is essentially created a cheat sheet to let you get through the existing application with hopefully minimal drama as we do that. And thank you for bearing with us in order to make that happen. And I think the folks that participated previously have a pretty good understanding of what those applications look like. So we're thinking it's a relatively light lift for you to move through these various pieces.
Mitch, I'll hand it over to you to walk through the change in priority broadband projects.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. We can move on to the next slide. So one of the biggest differences in this program is the change in priority specifically. So one of the things that the policy notice did is it restored the priority broadband project definition back to the original IIJA definition, which you can read it here below, but essentially 100 megabits down, 20 megabits up at low latency, and then crucially can easily scale the speeds over time to meet evolving connectivity needs of the BSLs we're serving, as well as meet 5G and other advanced services as well. So kind of the big change for you guys is that previously end-to-end fiber projects were considered priority. Reliable broadband was in another tier, and then we had alternative technology, which included LEO and unlicensed fixed wireless. Now we're not able to prioritize by technology at all. It has to be on performance and performance against a given project area. So, and if you want to go to the next slide as well, Julie. So how this is going to work here is any applicant can indicate if they believe their project is a priority project. And we'll kind of talk about what that looks like. So in your application, you will need to identify that you're submitting as a priority project. If you do so, you'll be asked to submit a series of or respond to a series of questions to validate that you're capable of meeting the priority needs of the state. If you chose not to be a priority project, then you kind of go down the path that was previously indicated, so maybe a little bit less work, but being a priority application allows the state to assess those applications first. So it is kind of a critical thing that you should take away today is if you are concerned about where you stand or what your product is, you should endeavor to be a priority project. If you are not concerned about that, then I think you should focus on a non-priority application. Some of the key criteria will be spelled out in the application materials that have already been posted, but as you go through the guide, it will fill those out as well. Basically, it's capacity to meet the needs now, as well as scalability. Key factors will play into location density and geography will also be important as in the analysis that is done. We can move to the next slide, Julie. So as I mentioned earlier, priority projects are assessed first. However, we used to have the benchmark price previously where you had to get within a specific budget for a project area. Currently, we are in a situation where we're not really concerned about that benchmark price anymore. However, we, in prioritizing priority projects, within that fall within excessive cost. So Wyoming is setting an excessive project cost threshold at $25,000 per BSL on average. Anything above that, we'll have the right to assess non-priority instead. One of the big caveats I want to make on this is the NTIA has not set a nationwide priority, cost cap on any project. However, they state clearly that they reserve the right to reject any applications put forth in the final proposal should they deem it excessive. We think this price here accurately reflects the needs of Wyoming, while also is reasonable standpoint for NTIA. So we're anticipating moving forward. Well, we are moving forward with this as our high cost threshold. Yeah. I think I'm good on this slide, Julie. All right. So I mentioned earlier you have to fill out additional questions if you decide to be a priority application. This has already been posted on there and be clear in the guide, but there are new priority technical templates. And again, why we are basing priority projects on performance and not technology type. Different types of networks have different technology deployed and the questions that are relevant to them. So there is a template, one template per technology. So if you're doing a fiber project only, you have to fill out a fiber project to indicate priority. If you're doing a fiber and fixed wireless project, you would fill out both templates. If you are doing unlicensed fixed wireless and licensed fixed wireless, you'd fill out those templates together as well. If you are not proposing to be a priority applicant, you do not need to fill these forms out. Instead, you would, again, follow the process that was previously with some additional requirements of doing the technical narrative and some more submitting a logical diagram as well.
Mitch, one of the questions that we've had come in is if they previously submitted a priority application, if an update is going to be required. So that is one of the structural changes that has been made in the application. You used to be able to select whether it was priority, non-priority, or alternative technology, but we're not really using those categories anymore. And so the first question, I think it's 1.1 that you'll answer, is whether you would like to be considered priority or non-priority. And if you would like to resubmit a fully fiber application as priority, there are going to be new materials. As Mitch just said, you will have to complete the fiber technology template for priority. But for some reason, if you are submitting your application as a non-priority, then it would be following the previous technical requirements.
Yeah, really good point, Julie. And these templates are not intended to be huge lifts in addition to what was provided previously. If you submitted a priority application last time, I don't believe that this is going to be a difficult challenge for any applicant to provide. I think in the case of fiber or HFC, relatively straightforward. In the realm of fixed wireless, we're not asking for anything that wasn't required in the application previously, which is that fixed wireless validation template anyway. So it's more or less the same work that was going into those applications. And again, I think it is really important that applicants provide that information, insert that they are a priority where possible, because that is a very key part of the program going forward. The other question that's on this topic, so I may as well cover as well, but is the high cost threshold calculated by location or is an average by project area? So the question is, it's an average per project area. If the average, and we'll go into the formula on this maybe a little bit later, but essentially if you have, it's the outlay that you're looking for, or the grant funds you're requesting divided by the number of BSLs you're serving in that application is your project cost. And if it's below the $25,000, then it will fall within the threshold.
Just another question, if any information from prior applications will be auto-populated. Yes, so you'll probably start to get some automated emails soon, but in the next 30 minutes, all of the previously submitted applications will be unlocked. So if you want to go in and leverage what you can from those applications and just adjust as needed following the instructions in the guide, you can use the responses and files that you have already submitted for applications. Applicants can also start completely new applications, but if you want to leverage a lot of the content that you've already submitted, they'll be saved and they've been put back into draft mode for you to use. I don't think any more
And I think I
questions.
can move on to the next slide,
Yeah.
Julie.
Okay. And this was just a preview of what one of the tabs in the technical template will look like. This is specifically for fiber, but as Mitch said, these have been uploaded to the WBO website along with instructions. There are instruction manuals for each technical template, but there are spreadsheets with multiple tabs, and you'll just be providing narrative responses or some numerical responses. Just wanted to give a quick preview so it wasn't so, esoteric.
Thanks, Julie. All right, scoring rubric. So this is a part of it. A major change as well as how these are scored. the bargain round and any subsequent rounds that happens. Basically, NTIA has provided a revised scoring rubric for us to use. Specifically, they call out that the minimal BEAD outlay is the primary factor in scoring or ranking applications. And then secondary scoring is left, well, there's 3 specific items left to the discretion of each eligible entity. However, the secondary scoring is only invoked for applications that overlap in the same general area and are within 15% of the lowest cost proposal. We're going to go into those details in the next slides. All right, so primary scoring criteria, we mentioned this previously, but your total BEAD outlay, so the funds you're requested divided by the BSLs you're committed to serve, is your, your cost threshold or your cost per passing as defined. And it's not quite as simple as just that as like the best proposal necessarily. So the notice also says that an eligible entity must select a combination of project proposals with the lowest overall cost to the program. And so we can't look at just each project in a vacuum per se. And so on the right hand side of this slide is a kind of a crude project area that was drawn, and you see multiple proposals of project A, B, C, or D. And in previous rounds of this, when we had time to do negotiation, like months to do negotiation, we were able to award project A and then negotiate with project C or B to have the best outcome for the state. We're not going to have time to do that under this new guidance. So what we'll have to look at is each of these together in a project area. And there's scenarios based on the priority or cost per BSL of these various locations or projects. That there's a scenario where C and D may be a better outcome for the state than A and B collectively. Again, a lot of that depends on if there's overlap and what it looks like. As far as deconfliction goes, we're able to deconflict down to the BSL now. So if there are 2 applications in a given project area that have no overlap as well, they can be deconflicted and don't have to be compared against each other, even if they fall within the same project area or formerly PAU as well. Next slide, Julie. So in the scenario where we have a overlapping project within 15, multiple overlapping projects, they fall within 50% of the lowest project cost. We have secondary criteria to fall back on. Say that 5 times fast. The criteria that we're going to use in the state is the preliminary selected criteria. We're going to award 50 points for that. So if an applicant had previously been preliminary selected for that project area through our process of the first round of BEAD, they will receive 50 points. If they were not the preliminarily selected awardee, they would receive 0 points. And then the other criteria we're going to look at, and we'll go into more detail in the next slide, is the speed of the network, and it's going to be based on the response of the application. I guess, Julie, if you want to hop to the next slide, there'll be an area in the application which you indicate what you're capable of providing as far as capacity or performance here. And you'll select an option which will then generate the points you see in the far right column. This is required to provide some validation as well, so there'll be questions for that. And I want to be clear on this one. You're not providing the speed that is, it's the maximum speed to any possible BSL. So if you're in a scenario where you have 5 BSL where you can provide 2 gigs by 2 gigs, but then the rest of them you can only do 100 by 100, you would select D and not A. It's the lowest common denominator of what you're capable of doing for the speed. And then feel free to move to the next one, Julie.
Before we move on, I just want to check if there aren't any other questions related to scoring. Mitch, we do have one in the Q&A regarding the PE.
Yeah, I think that's a good time to answer this as well. So for existing applications, will a prior PE certification for the network design need additional review or unchanged elements based on the new submission? Or sorry, for unchanged elements. If you're not changing elements on what was previous, the PE certification document that was uploaded will be accepted. And so you'll submit that, or keep that in there as as provided, and we'll assess it as such. So yes. And then I want to go back just to before we move off of the scoring. Again, just kind of a reminder, there's a lot of things to jump through before we get to the secondary scoring. It has to be 2 applications of the same priority level. They need to be overlapping in a project area, and they need to be within 15% of each other. And so there's a lot of process to get to that point, but it is required as well. So.
No new questions. So I'm just going to keep moving on. We'll discuss the new project areas. The next slide will have a map, but just as a an overview, the project area boundaries have been revised, and you'll recognize that they align with the preliminarily selected proposals. There was a lot of great work done through negotiations, and so to leverage that work, the project areas have been adjusted. As Mitch said earlier, it is down to the BSL level. So the map I'll show you in a moment is more of just a visual representation. But for these new project areas, applicants will only be able to submit one application for a project area. So you can submit multiple applications, but it's one project area per submission. And there are 64 project areas in total throughout the state. So the map, and this is also available on the website. It's again a clustering of the BSLs within each project area. And so the location lists that are available on the website for download, there are 64 separate spreadsheets. You'll be able to tell based on this map where they relatively correspond to in the state. And all of those resources are available, the BSL spreadsheet, and I'll go over what the new one looks like in a bit. But this reflects some reconciliation with the latest version of the BDC Fabric version 6, and it includes the unlicensed fixed wireless evidence that was substantiated and validated through the data collection that was completed earlier this month and late June. And it also reflects any of the reason codes 3 and 4. And so it is the latest data for BEAD eligible locations.
And I think all that's great. And I'll just kind of reiterate the points that Julie touched on. The restructuring notice allows us to solidify or update these project areas. So the formerly PAUs, which will be represented in the location list, are no longer the project area that we're looking for. To Julie's point, the reason we did this is this outcome that you see on this map was months of negotiation and hard work. And while we would love to do that again, there's no time in that 90-day window. So we're starting essentially where we left off at that point to see what we can do better in this benefit of the bargain round. Additionally, as Julie mentioned, these locations are right down to the BSL. So there might be some area 64 that locations that fall within this visual representation, something come up in another state. The numbers don't mean anything specific. These are just numbers that were assigned to this specific one. So one doesn't have any sort of special thing over 64. It's just what they were previously. And as I mentioned, everything's the same down to the BSL. We had to update the fabric, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail on the next slide.
So the new spreadsheet that applicants will be uploading, and it'll go into question 3.1, which is where you previously submitted the CBG spreadsheet. You were identifying which project areas you were including in your project. This new version combines the CBG spreadsheet, the descoping spreadsheet, which allowed applicants to identify high cost locations that they were removing or proposing to remove from the project. And then the third spreadsheet it includes is the non-BEAD eligible list, where you were able to identify locations and propose which ones should be removed using the NTIA reason codes. And so now that has been aggregated all into one spreadsheet. And so there are going to be 64 spreadsheets in a zip file. And it's got information for all of the BSLs. I'm hoping that the screenshots show up. If not, this webinar will be posted, and you'll also have access to the actual spreadsheets. But you'll see there is the BSL ID, so the FCC location ID for locations in project area 1, and it's also got the PAU ID. So you'll be able to relate it back to the previous project areas in case you've got that built into your data sets. It'll also have the BEAD status, and what they mean is whether it's been omitted or indicated, or if it's eligible to be served by the applicant and fundable for BEAD. In the case of an omitted location, it is not fundable and it has had to be removed for a variety of reasons from the list of eligibility. If applicable, you'll see an explanation in the explanation column. And so in this case, it's a CPF award that is covering those first couple locations. And so applicants will go through the rest of the columns for any they are proposing to serve, and they'll provide the technology code. There's a drop-down validation built into it, so you're not having to type everything in, but you'll be selecting at the BSL level the technology that you'll use to cover that location, the anticipated upload and download speeds, if it's low latency or not. And if there are any locations that are eligible to be identified by applicants as ineligible and non-BEAD, then you can also provide those reason codes and any of the supplementary reason codes and evidence that you plan on submitting to substantiate that claim.
Yeah, I think this is all the idea of all of this is to simplify the effort that had to go in. Last time we had multiple sheets that needed to be tied together and led for a lot of error and a lot of curing that had to happen through the process. As we noted, with the 90 days, we're not going to have time to go through that level of curing. So we hope to simplify this. There's one sheet for each of the 64 areas to go through. And if you're bidding on area 1, you just need to use the sheet number 1. There's one application, or a maximum of one project area rather per application. So if you're submitting a project for area 1, you only need to have access to the project ID or the project locations list for area 1. We did take the liberty of pre-filling out all the information as possible to, again, minimize typos. So as Julie mentioned, the project ID. For your previous reference, we kept the PAU ID that they fell into. We'll talk about that a little bit more as well. We have all of the BSL IDs entered in directly, so we don't have to worry about typos or anything on that. As Julie mentioned, there's the BEAD status. It will fall into the categories in the instructions, but specifically, it will either be flagged as eligible, unserved, eligible, underserved, or then there's a couple other things as well. So we have omit, which means that under no circumstance can we allow you to bid on them. We kept this in the document so you can see what's different from there. Those fall into either reason codes 4, which is, as Julie mentioned, it's a forcible commitment. And then we also have the no longer in the fabric. So if it's been removed from fabric 6, we're not allowed to let you bid on that as well because it doesn't exist. And then anything that was substantiated during unlicensed fixed wireless may also not, the challenge process may not be bid on as well. Anything that is indicated, and I see this question is popping up as well, is we had to also indicate anything that was on our previous eligible locations list that is now being reported as served in the latest version of the fabric. So, or what I say, V6 is what was required by NTIA. So in those locations, it will say indicated as being served in the latest fabric. You are still able to bid on those locations if you'd like. Again, the caveat being this program is not about overbuilding, previously built locations. So we know that the state has a better idea of what those are than the federal government, and we think you providers have a better idea than what we have as well. So if you are interested in including any indicator locations in your application, we encourage you to do so, but you just need to be aware that they've been reported on the BDC, map as served. And I think best practice would be for you to, put them in your application and then file a challenge for the locations that are indicated. That way the NTIA would understand that we have a strong feeling that the reporting is false. And then to Julie's last point, we made it very simple of what you have to fill in here. You would enter if you are going to serve by the application, and the options you have are yes or true, right? To say, I'm interested in this location. If you leave it blank, we assume that you're not interested in the location. And then There's also no, which allows you to say this, no, this is not eligible for BEAD, and then allows you to follow up with some reason codes. In addition to flagging if you are going to serve the location or not, for each location you are going to serve, we require the technology code to be entered. This is a drop down as well from all of the BEAD eligible technology types. As part of our final proposal, we have to indicate to the NTIA what technology every location is going to be served in. In order to do that, we need you to fill in the code, and then also your anticipated upload and download speeds for that specific area, and indicate if you're able to meet the low latency requirement, which if you're bidding on it, we expect that to be the case. And I'm going to go through, okay, a couple good questions while we're on this. So we spoke to the indicate and what the implications of that are. What fabric version do the locations align with? That is a great question. So per NTIA rules, we have to use the previous fabric, which for us was fabric 3, I believe. What we would do is any locations that would be added to that would be any federal defaults identified by NTIA and presented to the state in order to add them into the list. There were no federal defaults identified by NTIA, so no additional locations were added. One of the steps that we had to take in order to optimize the BEAD locations was look at all of our eligible locations in comparison to Fabric V6. Again, anything that is an enforceable commitment or been removed from the fabric altogether is still on our thing, but omitted. You're not allowed to bid on those because those are covered sufficiently. Anything from unlicensed fixed wireless challenge, it's omitted, or not omitted, but you're not able to bid on that as well because it's enough evidence to prove that these are served. And then anything that is shown as served in Fabric V6, which I believe was as of December of last year, basically you're still able to bid on that, but again, cautioning you that you should most likely put in a challenge if you're going to bid on those, so that it signals to the FCC that we, or to the NTIA rather, that we believe that these are falsely reported.
And then Mitch, we've got one final question on whether the letter of credit requires specific amounts for each application. I'm going to follow up in our written FAQ to that one. I don't want to misspeak on that. So Dean, keep an eye out for the FAQ we'll publish soon.
Yes.
Thank you. I don't see any more for right now, so we'll move along. Next slide on match, Mitch.
Yes. Now that we armed you with all the information about how you submit your locations in there, and we talked about the threshold previously, the program still requires a 25% match which is 25% of the total project cost, still required, asterisks, except for certain projects that are in designated high cost areas as previously identified by the NTIA. So how that information was disseminated last time was through census block groups being identified by the NTIA. All of our previous PAUs fell within census blocks, right? So if you submitted a specific high cost PAU, there was no match requirement. And if you had some combination of high cost and regular PAUs, you would prorate your match, up to 25% based on that percentage. And so what we have here is new project areas defined in the bargain round that they may contain one or more census block groups, and there may be a combination of high cost census block groups or regular as well. And so what you should look at is any BSL that falls within a high cost area is a high cost BSL. And so when you're doing your calculation of how much match you need to do, it either needs to be 25%, or it needs to follow the guidelines of the formula below, which is 1 minus the number of high cost BSL you've applied for divided by the total number of BSL you applied for times 25 to give you your actual minimum match percentage. Previously, we had 85 PAUs that qualified for high cost. In the benchmark spreadsheet that is still on the website, but the benchmarks no longer matter, or the PAUs don't matter, you can reference which PAUs qualify and then all subsequent BSL. So if you're inclined to have less than 25% match within our rules, you can look those up and identify that. I think that's what the participants did last time and understood the requirement there as well.
I'm not seeing any questions pop up, so we'll just move on to the next section. This is an overview of application materials. We've talked about this a lot. There have been some updates to the files available on the WBO website. It's still going to be the same location, but you'll see that the templates and samples list of materials has changed a little bit. The arrows indicate the completely new files, and so you'll see the addendum template. We referenced that before. That's where you'll have some of the new questions on the low-cost service option and a certification. And you'll have instructions on how to fill that out and upload it. The submission cheat sheet, this is supposed to help prioritize, which questions you need to answer if you are indicating your project is a priority project and if it's a non-priority project, because we're working within the pre-configured portal structure. Some questions aren't going to be relevant if you are submitting the priority technical templates. Whereas if you aren't indicated as a priority project, maybe you'll just be following the old guidelines for submitting a fixed wireless or satellite technical template. And so the cheat sheet helps move through that so that you're not having to figure out which questions are required or not, and how best to respond to a null question. And the project area locations list, which is a zip file of all 64, is also on the website. Obviously, you'll only use one of the project area location lists per application, but it's just easier if everyone can download the zip file instead of y'all having to, go through 64 different hyperlinks on the website. Mitch, can you speak to this question that just came in?
Yeah, certainly. So the question is, if a provider includes a free space optical FSO middle mile segment in their application, should they use the fixed wireless design template and complete any applicable fields to submit technical data for their wireless optical technology? The answer is we'll put that into the FAQ and get back to you directly. I want to make sure that I check with the wireless engineers doing the review of the technical materials to make sure we get you a proper answer.
Thank you. And then I put a screenshot in of the cheat sheet so y'all can see what it's looking like, but it just lists every question and it'll tell you if it's required and updated. So then it's still going to have a required submission, but maybe the request has changed a little bit in what we're asking for. If your previous submission is adequate and it meets those requirements, then it's fine. We're just noting that the program's requirement has changed a little bit. If it's still, just listed as required, then it's you can probably just leave your answer. But I do really recommend going line by line through the application guide and following through to make sure that you are submitting a fully, comprehensive, sufficient application. You'll see that some of the questions are listed as null, and I think we had this screenshot earlier in the webinar deck. But some of them are just not required anymore, and the question itself has been eliminated. But as we aren't deleting things from the portal so that we can make sure that we're progressing in the compressed timeline, the question is still there, which means that it might just require an NA response or a blank upload of a PDF to meet the submission requirement. So the cheat sheets are available for non-priority and priority projects.
And to clarify, the new definition of priority and non-priority, not the previous definition. Yes. This would be, yeah, exactly.
Apologies. And so I feel like we've covered this as well, but just a high-level overview on what to keep an eye out for. And the guide really does go into detail on this, but making sure that you're looking at the updated guidance for question requirements and navigating, the flow of questions. Previously, we had applicants select whether they were priority, non-priority, and alternative technology, and that impacted the skip logics. Certain questions wouldn't be visible, whereas others would be required. But now that everyone is going to be selecting alternative technology in response to question 1.2, and that has allowed us to require the right questions for everyone. There are some changes that are going to pop up. And so just following the guide and making sure that you're submitting the right materials, whether you are the new priority or new non-priority. And then file naming, that's one thing I really want to note. There were requirements in how you are uploading the files for each question. If it was 3.1 CBG, I think the file name requirement was 3-1-CBG. We've had to keep the file naming requirements, and so even if you're submitting a new file and it's no longer the CBG spreadsheet, the file naming instructions are the same, and they're still in the application guide. And you can add on, other content into the file name, but it still has to have that requirement for the portal to be able to validate that submission. And so that's just something to note. And for questions that don't require any edits, if you've already submitted a sufficient response, there's no need to edit that and change the file name. This is only for new submissions or updating submissions. And then the final thing, just as a reminder, in the previous CBG spreadsheet, you were able to identify the BEAD funding request along with your project areas. The locations list template that we're asking for won't ask for your funding request. So your response to question 2.2 is the only location to indicate your BEAD funding request. So just wanted to note that. And then we have our final slide on benefit of the bargain round. Again, the portal is open today. Once this webinar ends, you're free to go into the portal and submit new applications or go into previously submitted ones. They've all been unlocked by now, and you can leverage the materials you've already submitted and just work your way through in adjusting the questions that have been updated. And then we are closing the window on July 20th at 5 p.m. I want to note that that is a Sunday. I encourage applicants to have the applications either completed or at least questions asked and answered by Friday, July 18th. There's no technical support from the portal vendor over the weekend. And so if there's some sort of glitch in submission, we won't be able to address that over the weekend. So making sure you have as much of your application completed by the 18th, or you at least know what you plan to submit. And if you have any questions, just getting those answered by WBO before close of business on Friday. But you do have until the 20th at 5 p.m. Mountain Time to submit the applications.
And I'll just chime in on this as well. Is we if we had more time, we would do this different, right? We would reprogram our portal and have it meet exactly what we need. But I think what we've tried to do here is again, with the short timeline, we tried to make it as simple as possible to get through. And I think it is very difficult. It's a very short timeline for the program to review these things, to get the portal set up for providers to participate as well. We appreciate any and all energy you have. Our hope is that the work that you've provided previously or plan to provide, you can leverage if necessary to move forward. Again, I think if there's critical things for folks to do, it is to work on the priority template, should that be something that they consider doing and submitting a priority application. I think additionally, to the extent, again, a lot of time, not a lot of time, but we, make sure that you fill things out as correct as possible. We don't have the time to do the curing that we did. We don't want to catch anyone on technicalities. We want the best applications we can get, and we want to have the proper leeway, but there will not be time to go back and forth multiple times and fix anything specific. So if you're bidding on 500 locations and you only put 495 in, you probably aren't going to get those 5. Alternatively, you put in 520, we're going to think you're doing 520, right? And again, this is a lot, but for many of you, some of this should be familiar, and we're hoping to leverage any of the shortcuts we can make in this program to get you within this July 11th through July 20th deadline.
Thanks, Mitch. I'm not seeing any new questions yet, but if folks are typing them in.
Yeah, I think we can give a little bit of time because I'm sure there will be. Yeah, no, I do appreciate it. The short answer is unfortunately not. I wish we had more time. But what the biggest risk to all of this is us not completing it in the deadline and then none of this going through. We had got so close last time, to have a very good outcome from the state. And this reiteration of the program is difficult for everybody. We are endeavoring to try to capture as much success as we can given the constraints. We try to lay out our best foot forward, and I'm sorry to everyone that may have to work extra. I know we won't be having fun on any of these weekends as well, and we do thank you for your patience and understanding on all of this. And again, I wish we had more time.
All right. Um, I'm not seeing any more questions at this time. Um, but if do any questions do come up, feel free to reach us. Feel free to reach out to me personally or email us at the broadband office email address listed here. Um, but I'll be talking to you soon. I hope this webinar was informative and there was some value there. It looks like before we head out, looks like we do have one more question that was entered. Um, Mitch or Julie, can any of the information such as performance bonds can be submitted after the filing deadline?
So we'll follow up with an answer in the FAQ. If it is a requirement in the application, it does need to be submitted before the deadline of July 20th, but I will follow up specifically on performance bonds.
Yeah, if you want to follow up with that request too, and then if you want to identify which other states are allowing this as indicated, you don't have to call them out on here, but it'd be useful to know so we can understand.
Okay, perfect. Well, everyone, have a great weekend. We'll be in communication, I'm sure, here in the next couple of weeks. But thanks again for your time and have a great day. Thanks, everyone.